this is our brain. Okay, imagine this is a brain. I know it's very difficult to imagine for all of you. And from brain there are peripheral, I mean from PNS comes, that is nerves, that is phrenic nerve and the other nerves that are supplying the respiratory muscles. These nerve are going to end up in respiratory muscles. Okay, let's take this one. So just respiratory muscle. Okay, respiratory muscle and rib cage. Okay, rib cage goes along with the respiratory muscle. Okay, uh, that is chest wall and pleura. There is respiratory muscles outside chest wall and pleura and the lungs. Okay, and the lungs are invested within it. So a type 2 respiratory failure, basic problem here is alveolar hypoventilation. Okay, there is alveolar hypoventilation, so that both oxygen and carbon dioxide, I mean oxygen delivery, I mean oxygen exchange, oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange, both are getting affected in these people, resulting in this type 2 respiratory failure. We call it hypercapnic respiratory failure. Here there will be invariably there will be raised PCO2 and PaCO2. Most of the time there will be decreased PaO2. Okay, and the management of type 2 respiratory failure is actually clinical art. Okay, you have to understand some amount of physics to go about the treatment of each of these conditions. Okay, so let's get into each of these. I'll be discussing the basic important causes of each one of these. Central cause. Okay, central cause, the patient is not having a drive, the patient is not having a central drive to breathe. Okay, most commonly we see in overdose sedative overdose. Okay, uh, it could be nitrogenic or because of poisoning. Okay, second could be stroke, especially brainstem strokes, or it could be because of encephalitis, or it could be because of hypothyroidism, could be because of hypothyroidism, it could be because of hypothermia. So this is in most common to less common orders. This is called CNS. Okay. Let's talk about peripheral nerves. So peripheral nerves, it could be because of spinal cord injury, because of myasthenia gravis. Okay, and there are many other things. Okay, many more causes. These are the common. I also forgot phrenic nerve injury. Phrenic nerve injury during any procedure or due to any trauma, the phrenic nerve can get injured, resulting in this, or muscular dystrophies, or we have a peculiar thing called critical illness diseases. Okay, we are done with the spinal cord and nerve diseases. Next will be the thoracic cage. Okay, thoracic cage diseases. It could be kyphoscoliosis. It could be secondary to ankylosing spondylitis. Could be because of flail chest. Okay, flail chest that we get in trauma. It could be because of fibrothorax. Very less, very. I mean, it's a rare thing that we can get. Most common will be kyphoscoliosis. It's a thoracic cage disorder. And what are the disorders? This is about the central disorder, nerve disorder, and the thoracic cage disorder. Okay, thoracic cage disorder, and there are there are other problems. The lung. Okay, the most commonly we see are COPD. Okay, the most commonly that we see is COPD, and also in case of lung, in case of bronchial asthma. So these things can have the type 2 respiratory failure. And what are the other causes? When there is an increased CO2 production. Okay, whenever there is, apart from all these things, there are some causes where there is increased CO2 production that we get in fever, thyrotoxicosis. Okay, mm, overzealous exercise. These causes alone cannot cause type 2 respiratory failure unless it is associated with one of those causes which we have discussed earlier. Okay, so these causes we can remember like won't breathe is the first causes. Won't breathe. Can't breathe means due to peripheral nervous system and respiratory muscle weakness, and there will be abnormal gas exchange inside the lungs. Okay, as I told, most of the process, if the respiratory process, if they are going to chronic thing, even CO2 deficient will be difficult in case of these chronic lung disorders, eventually leading to type 2 respiratory failure. Okay, so how to go about each one of these things? Okay, most of in IMCU we will be diagnosing many cases with CO2 narcosis. Okay, many cases with CO2 narcosis, but most of the time it could be COPD. Okay, but there can be other disorders which we can miss. Okay, how we should not miss? How can we um, diagnose that? Diagnose each and every lung disorder. Okay, I mean each and every cause of type 2 respiratory failure, which I will be discussing now. How to go about each one of these things. So how to go about each one of these? First is history. History and examination most of the times will be yielding the problem. So in history and examination, what and all you have to concentrate. Okay. So what and all you have to concentrate in the sense. So how long the patient has been having these things. Okay. How long the patient has been having the problems, the illness, comorbid conditions, drugs they are taking. Okay. Drugs they are taking like sedative use. The patient might be having treatment for COPD. The patient might be on treatment for motor neuron disease, myasthenia gravis, all these things. Okay, or history of, you have to definitely ask history about spinal injury or history of myasthenia gravis. That is we call that as ptosis, those ascending head of paralysis. History regarding polio, history regarding GBS, all these things we have to ask in case of history. History regarding encephalitis. Okay, these things we can mostly get by history. Okay, and how to go about examination? In examination you have to do complete examination. Okay, how the patient is, the sensorium, respiratory status, that includes patient's respiratory rate or work of breathing, chest abnormalities. Okay, including inspection palpatory or auscultatory abnormalities. Okay, auscultatory abnormalities. Next next CNS examination should not be no patient with type 2 respiratory failure, the examination is incomplete. The examination is incomplete without CNS examination. Okay, because CNS could be the cause for type 2 respiratory failure, or you can see effect of type 2 respiratory failure in CNS. What are effect that you call it as CO2 narcosis? Okay, CO2 narcosis. Basic problem in CO2 narcosis is nothing but CO2 again. CO2 is easily diffusible across the brain, resulting in increase in acidity in the CSF. Okay, H2CO3 again will dissociate into H plus and CO3. This H plus will irritate the brain parenchyma, resulting in, there are many pathogenesis again underlying this. Since I have to discuss the treatment in brief, I'm not touching that. The basic problem here is the this excessive acid accumulation that is causing the features of CO2 narcosis. CO2 narcosis, the features can be vary from mild, moderate, or severe. When you call it as mild, mean the patient might be having daytime somnolence, excessive easy fatigability. The patient might be having disturbed sleep, or the patient might be having palpitations. All these things are mild. When you call it as moderate, the patient may become irritable. Okay, the patient become irritable. The patient may develop some kind of short-term memory loss. The patient might be having the drowsiness. All these things will be moderate. When the patient goes for stuporous or the comatose stage, we call it as severe, severe CO2 narcosis. Okay, severe CO2 narcosis. CO2, the CNS examination can see, not CNS, it's a nervous system examination to call it as, not CNS, it's a nervous system examination, can yield the cause for CO2 narcosis or can yield you the effect of CO2 narcosis. Okay, so CO2 CNS examination should be complete. Now, at this particular point of time, I want to introduce you the two variables. Okay, two variables here that we should be actually doing with each patient in on ventilator. I think most of you wouldn't have heard about this. Okay, we can actually do with our EC ventilators, especially Drager and the Drager ventilator and this thing we have, right? I forgot another thing that we have. Those two things have the settings
Orion.
through which we can calculate the
Orion bala.
madam. Orion இல்ல மேம், அது இன்னொன்று மேம். டிராகர் அப்புறம் இன்னொன்று என்ன இருக்கும், நல்ல வென்டிலேட்டர் ஒன்று இருக்குமே.
Mind
Whatever.
mind
Okay.
ray.
Mind ray. Okay, mind ray. So these two ventilators, I have tried with these two ventilators to find out these two variables. So what are these two variables? Okay, NIF or MIP. NIF means negative inspiratory force. Okay. MIP is maximum inspiratory pressure. Both the things mean same. Okay, both NIF or MIP are like synonyms. Okay, they go on hand in hand. NIF is like MIP, the measurements same and values are same, but they can be called interchangeably. Okay, MIF can be called as NIF can be called as MIP, or MIP can be called as NIF. So what are these two things? Okay, so what is negative inspiratory? There is negative inspiratory force means the force that is developed, okay, inside the airways during a deep inspiration, okay, with the deep inspiratory effect that is put by the patient. Okay, so I'll make it very clear now. So let's say, so this NIF and MIP are the predictors of the peripheral respiratory failure. Okay, peripheral respiratory apparatus failure, like nerve muscle disorder. Let's take a patient with GBS, myasthenia gravis, polio, ALS, or whatever. These patients will be having the altered NIF, which will be able to find out the cause. Okay, so NIF is, how to calculate NIF is nothing but these ventilators will be actually having the NIF, the force that is there are particular measuring devices which can be used to calculate this NIF, which are not available in our setup. So in such setting, how we can calculate NIF or MIP in the sense, this is actually measured in CPAP mode of ventilation. Okay, CPAP mode of ventilation. That is, we intubate the patient, we give the patient, and we put the patient on mechanical ventilation. And after some time, the patient regains consciousness. Okay, the patient regains consciousness, and we are going to put the patient on CPAP ventilation. Patient will be spontaneous breath, forcing the breath in form of positive pressure. Okay, that is the secret. What to do is, when you open up the settings of this, we'll be having many parameters: tidal volume, PEEP, pressure support, and most of the times you wouldn't have noticed this trigger pressure in CPAP ventilation. This normally trigger pressure we have kept into 2 centimeter H2O. This trigger pressure normally in our ventilator, it is preset in 1 to 2 centimeter H2O. It is nothing but whenever the patient takes in a breath, okay, whenever during inspiration, we know that the initially at the end of expiration, the airway pressure will be positive. But when the inspiration starts, the airway pressure starts dropping and it becomes more negative at the end of expiration. Okay, so what happens here in the sense, at the end of expiration, the airway pressure will be very high positive, like around 10 or whatever. It's not an, I'm telling this an example. No, it's not an ideal number, it's an example. Okay, it's an example. Let's take it as plus 10. Now the patient is completely expired and started taking inspiration. Once the patient, in the beginning of inspiration, the patient will be having a low positive pressure, that's 1 to 2. The ventilator will sense that pressure and will deliver the breath. Okay, ventilator will deliver the breath. So how to calculate NIF or MIP without any device in the sense, normal NIF or MIP is more than 40. More than minus 40. That is, when it is more minus, that is, if it's minus 60, minus 70, minus 80, it's normal. And values up to minus 20 is acceptable. Okay, when it is becomes less than minus 20, like minus 15, minus 10, then that is subnormal. So now how we are going to do is, we are going to set up this trigger pressure to minus 20. Okay, we are going to set up the ventilator's trigger pressure to minus 20. Minus 20 in the sense the patient has to generate that amount of negative pressure inside his airway to trigger a breath by the ventilator. Okay. We are indirectly assessing the NIF or MIP. Okay. That is, I told less than minus 20 means it's abnormal. Okay. Now we are going to set up the trigger pressure from 1 to 2, that is plus 1 to minus 20. So, and we have to ask the patient to take a deep, nice breath. Okay. After a proper, after normal inspiration, the patient has to take a deep, nice breath. And when the patient reaches that kind of respiratory effort, that is become minus 20 means that high respiratory effort, the ventilator will deliver a breath. When you see the curve, that is flow volume loop, there will be a trigger following there will be a breath delivery by the ventilator. Okay, so with with that we can be able to find out this NIF or MIP are the parameters indicating the patient is having intact respiratory muscle function, that is intact neuromuscular function. Okay, are you all clear about this? I just wanted to convey this thing.
Can you repeat shortly, sir? From that minus 20.
This minus 20 is actually minus 20 is acceptable value. Okay, normally there should be some the EL should be provided with sensors. Okay, these are devices like how we have devices for central venous pressure measurement. We have specific devices for pressure measurement, right? Like that kind of barometer will also be given by the providers, that is to the ventilator, by the companies. Okay, it's a very small kind like capnography, right? It will be like a capnograph. So if we have that kind of thing, we can fit into the patient's endotracheal tube, and after taking deep breath, it will immediately sense the negative inspiratory, that is NIF or MIP. Okay, but we don't have the device here. Okay, so what we are doing that we are substituting this minus 20 in the trigger pressure. That trigger pressure is normally we can set in the ventilator, like how we set the tidal volume to 480, PEEP to 7 centimeter H2O, pressure support around 15 to 20 we set no. Like the trigger pressure is usually preset at 1 to 2 plus 1 to 2. We have to reduce the trigger pressure to minus 20. So the concept behind that is the patient has to generate that amount of negative pressure in the airway by his function of his respiratory muscle is very good. He can way only when the patient okay. Let's take a patient with respiratory muscle weakness. The patient is having GBS, myasthenia gravis, or any peripheral muscle disorders, or due to spinal cord injury. The inspiratory, that is diaphragm, will be affected in these patients. If the diaphragm is affected, the patient will not be able to take a nice breath. In the other words, the patient will not be able to generate a more negative pressure in the airway, and we have set the trigger pressure to minus 20. Means the patient will not be the ventilator will not trigger a breath because the patient has not reached that kind of negative pressure due to his poor inspiratory effect. Are we clear?
So he won't get enough oxygen. So we can find out that it's because of respiratory muscle weakness.
Yeah, it's because of respiratory muscle. NIF or MIP are parameters to assess respiratory muscle weakness. Next time when you intubate a patient with GBS or myasthenia gravis, try this. This will work like a wonder. Okay, I have tried with many of the patients, and before weaning off, I always make sure that they have adequate NIF or MIP to extubate the patient. Okay, before extubating the patient, we should make sure that the patient is having adequate NIF or MIP. This is an indirect measurement. Okay, it's not actually given in any of the literatures. I remember this reading somewhere. Okay, remember this, sir. But most of the literatures has given it through the device. Okay, we have to measure through the device. But unfortunately, we don't have the device. But we can just use this setting to find out the whether the patient is having an adequate NIF or MIP.
Okay, sir.
Okay, I think I'm clear with it. So this is one parameter. Okay. Like if you are able to take from at least this thing, then that is fine. Okay. Now something known as P01. P01. What is this P01? This P01 is a measure of central respiratory drive. I'll tell you what is it. It's a measure of central respiratory drive. P01 is nothing but a pressure that is generated in the airway within first 0.1 seconds or 100 milliseconds. 100 milliseconds is nothing but 0.1 seconds. Means there is an inspiratory valve in every ventilator, right? whenever the expiration gets over, the expiratory valve closes and inspiratory valve opens. There is a time lag between these two things, which is nothing but the 0.1 milliseconds. Okay, there is 0.1 milliseconds or actually 0.1 seconds or 100 milliseconds. So that is the pressure that is generated within that particular period of time in airway is nothing but P01. So the inspiratory valve is closed. Okay, inspiratory valve is closed within that milliseconds. So the CNS has to, that is the brain has to trigger the breath. Okay, that is inspiratory valve is not open, so ventilator cannot trigger the breath. So the our usual ventilator, that is our brain, has to take care of it, right? So this P01, that is P.1, that is the pressure that is generated in first 100 milliseconds, is an indicative of central respiratory drive. Okay, I'm telling again, the inspiratory valves of any ventilator will take 100 milliseconds to open. Okay, to open. Like before the inspiratory valve opens, the CO2 levels, the change in CO2 levels will be detected by the brain parenchyma, and immediately the CNS will initiate the breath. Okay, it will be complemented by the breath that is offered by the ventilator, resulting in final inspiratory breath. So when you calculate the pressure that is generated within that, the pressure that is generated within this particular point of time is ventilator independent. Okay, this is ventilator independent. It completely depends on the central nervous system. So P01 can be taken as an indicator of central respiratory. That is, ventilator is not acting here, only the brain. So P1 between 1 to 3.5. Okay, P01 is normally between -1 to -3.5. When become less than -1, it means there is decreased respiratory drive. Okay, when it's more than -3.5, there is increased respiratory drive. Okay, increased respiratory drive. Most of the times, we will be dealing the patient with decreased central respiratory drive due to many causes like encephalitis, the drug overdose or whatever. Okay, but this thing we don't have in ventilator. We don't have an technique to find out like we found for NIF. We have to use sensor for it. Okay, since we don't have sensor, most of the times the patient will be having some kind of symptoms after excluding the peripheral nervous disorder and everything. The patient, if the patient sensorium is altered, then the neuromuscular problem is less likely, right? After excluding CO2 narcosis. So with the clinical history and examination, we can find out most of the thing. This P01, if it is there, then it will add up. It can strengthen our diagnosis. Okay, so with these two things in mind, let's go about the approach to type 2 respiratory failure. Okay, the class will go for another 15 minutes and I'll wind up with it. Am I clear about this concept P01?
Yes, Balaji.
Okay, so now I'm going to the approach. Okay, approach to hypercapnic respiratory failure. Approach to hypercapnic respiratory failure. How to go now? Type 2 respiratory failure. Type 2 respiratory failure. Okay, type 2 respiratory failure. The patient is having. We have to see apart the NIF and P01 are not substitutes for your clinical examination and history. Okay, they can just strengthen our diagnosis. Okay, we have to calculate NIF. I mean, we have to see NIF and P01. Okay, if there is normal NIF but decreased P01, means mostly it's a central hypoventilation. Okay, again I told NIF is a measure of the peripheral apparatus, whereas P01 is a measure of central thing. When I was discussing about NIF, I would have told the patient has to take a deep breath, whereas in P01, the patient doesn't need to take a deep breath. The patient, you won't ask the patient to do anything. The patient will be doing it. You will be just measuring it with the ventilator. When you will be breathing normally with the settings that you have set in the ventilator, and you will be measuring with a special device. Okay. If there is decreased NIF but normal P01, okay, then the problem is mainly neuromuscular. Okay, the main problem is neuromuscular. These are two parameters, and obviously the most common cause of type 2 respiratory failure that we see is COPD. Okay, COPD will be having a classical history. The patient will be having many features of COPD, like chest wall. The patient might be having wheeze, crackles, smoking history, or whatever. Those things will be there. So mostly we'll be able to find out. This is just to tell you that you have to next time when you go to ICU or COVID ICU, you can try this out. Okay, this is possible mainly in patient with when we ventilate the patient with snake bite, like toxical snake bite, myasthenia gravis, GBS. Just perform NIF and just see whether you are able to do it. Okay, I have been doing this since long time, and it is showing so much of benefit. It's like a foolproof technique to extubate a patient. Apart from we have usual extubation parameters, right? Usual extra extubation parameters like hemodynamic stability. There should be not more than heart rate should not be more than 130. Heart rate variability should not be more than 20%. There should not be acidosis. And respiratory rate should not be more than 35. These are the some like we have some weaning criteria, right? We can use this NIF along with the weaning criteria to decide whether the patient will go for re-intubation or whether we have to prolong the ventilation, okay, before extubating a patient. So coming to evaluation and management of type 2 respiratory failure. Evaluation, mostly I told about evaluation. Most important thing will be ABG. Most important thing will be ABG. And during the initial part of my discussion itself, I told how to differentiate between acute or chronic hyponatremia in most of the patients. Okay. Again in type 2 respiratory failure, always calculate A minus A. Okay. Again, I told the main problem is alveolar hypoventilation. Okay. When you calculate A minus A, if there is an hypoventilation due to alveolar pathology, then this A minus A will be normal. If it is due to other things, the A minus A can be increased. Okay. A minus A is basically mainly useful for type 1 respiratory failure, but can also be used for type 2 respiratory failure. And again things you have to do electrolytes, okay, chest X-ray, TFT, okay, toxicology screening, okay, toxicology screening, and obviously most important thing CBC I left. Okay, CBC. Because the patient might be a sepsis could be sepsis could have precipitated the exacerbation of COPD. Okay, and imaging including chest X-ray or CT. Okay, this is chest and also main important brain imaging if you suspect any central nervous system cause, NCS, okay, EMG, all these two. That is each one is a etiology guided investigation. Okay. So how to go about basic treatment? Okay, how to go about? I'll be discussing basic treatment and not be focusing on each cause. Okay, because each cause is an extensive thing. So certain things I need to convey here. First is O2 therapy. See, even if you have not listened throughout this, it's not a problem. Just listen for next 5 minutes, because that is it could be a take home message that you can take it like a take home message at the end of this session. So O2 therapy in case of type 2 respiratory failure. Okay, type 1 respiratory failure is nothing but you have to supplement the patient with O2, just decrease the as much as possible FiO2 as much as possible to keep the saturation between the target. Okay, O2 therapy in case of type 2 respiratory. What is the problem in type 2 respiratory failure? Let's take a patient with a COPD acute exacerbation. Okay, COPD acute exacerbation, nothing but an acute on chronic type 2 respiratory failure, right? So these patients might also be having hypoxia. As I told, type 2 respiratory failure will always be associated with hypercapnia. Most of the times it will be associated with hypoxia. Not always, most of the times it can be associated with hypoxia. No, so let's take a patient with an oxygen saturation of 82% and take a patient of oxygen saturation of 9. Why oxygen supplementation in these patients could be a double-edged sword? Okay, the traditional teaching, like right from our UG or even PG, is that we would have been taught like hypoxia in these patients is the only central respiratory drive that is causing the patient to breathe. Okay, the COPD patient might be having a CO2 narcosis. Already he will be hypoventilating due to the CO2 narcosis. So they used to teach us like this hypoxia is the only drive which could be maintaining this, but that is not the main cause. Okay, main cause is nothing but main cause is not that. Okay, let's take a patient with an acute exacerbation of emphysema. Okay, so this is one alveoli. This is a normal alveoli. This is a diseased alveoli. Okay, this is a diseased alveoli. This is a normal alveoli. Okay, there will be blood flow here and also blood flow here. So what happens is that in these patients, hypoxia, we know that hypoxia usually causes pulmonary vasoconstriction and systemic vasodilatation. And hypercapnia is vice versa. So what happens in hypoxia in the sense, let's take this in diseased alveoli. So diffusion is not happening properly here. Okay, so there will be hypoxia, which will be causing this pulmonary vasoconstriction, so that much amount of blood will be redirected to the place where there is a normal alveoli. Okay, that's a normal alveoli. The much amount of blood will be redistributed through this vasoconstrictor mechanism to the normal alveoli. What happens if you supplement the patient with oxygen? When you supplement this patient with oxygen, the O2 will go to both the things. When it goes into this normal alveoli, it's not a problem. Okay, it's going to exchange. It's going to involve itself in the ventilation process. But when it enters this alveoli, it is going to break up this vasoconstricting mechanism, resulting in that abolition of that redistribution, that is protective redistribution mechanism. It is actually redirecting the blood to the underventilated alveoli, from the underventilated alveoli to the normal ventilated alveoli. This is why oxygen should not be given jealously. Oxygen should not be given inappropriately or immediately to any patient present with type 2 respiratory failure. But oxygen is only required, only indicated when the saturation is less than or equal to 92%. Just keep the saturation between 90 to 92 in these patients present with type 2 respiratory failure. That itself will do. Just start the patient on 2 liters of oxygen. Okay, 2 liters of oxygen. Just see whether the saturation is improving. And if it's not improving, just increase it by 1 by 1. Okay. And when the saturation it becomes, you should not avoid the patient to get into severe hypoxia. Okay, because both if hypoxia and hypercapnia coexist, the chance of dying of cardiac arrest is very high. So also we have to try hypoxia. At the same time, you should not over jealously correct the hypoxia. Okay, hypoxia correction should be slow and steady here, and always maintain saturation like 90, between 90 to 92. You can always keep it like around 90. It's not a problem. It won't cause any harm to the patient. The patient will be completely fine. This is only for patients for the initial therapy. Okay, eventually you are going to treat the patient with bronchodilators or NIV if required. Okay, so next to go about NIV. Okay, how to go about NIV? That is, commonly we use BiPAP for these patients. Okay, BiPAP for these patients. How to go about NIV? So who are the patients who are suitable for NIV? When the patient in severe respiratory distress, respiratory rate more than or equal to 25, increased work of breathing. Okay, moderate narcosis, moderate acidosis, like moderate acidosis, we call it as 7.25 to 7.30. Okay. In these patients, you can try NIV. Okay, you can try NIV and hemodynamically stable. Okay, hemodynamically stable. These patients you can try NIV, and mode of choice will be BiPAP. Okay, we have in our Drager ventilator we have this BiPAP setting. You can just switch into BiPAP. What are the settings that you have to keep in BiPAP? Okay, BiPAP you have to keep like inspiratory pressure of 8 to 12 centimeter H2O, expiratory pressure of 3 to 5 centimeters H2O. So this is an ideal setting. Okay, this values that they have derived through multiple studies that they have done. When you keep this inspiratory and expiratory pressure, the patient the patient will be, you are providing a pressure at the same time. You will also be like you will also be intervening with the over usage of respiratory muscle. At the same time, you will be aiding to eliminate the carbon dioxide efficiently. Okay, so they say like the first 1 hour of NIV is very important. You have to strictly enforce the patient to have this kind of pressure. If you waste that first 1 hour of NIV, the patient will eventually land up with intubation. Okay, that first 1 hour of NIV is very important. You have to put the patient on the proper settings at the first 1 hour of NIV itself when you decide to put the patient on NIV. Okay, so if the patient doesn't fit into all these things, just put the patient on just do a rapid sequence intubation and put the patient on mechanical ventilator and adjust the respiratory rate accordingly to cause the CO2 elimination. Okay, you should be ideally doing ABG 4 to 6 hourly to see how much you have washed out carbon dioxide. Once there is adequate carbon dioxide washed out, like around 50 to 55, you can wean off the sedation and paralyzing agent one by one, and you can try trials. Breathing trial been discussing previously. All these things you can try, and you can finally wean off the patient from the ventilator. So this is basic treatment of the common type 2 respiratory failure, and you have to treat the cause specifically. If there's a CNS cause, if there is a sedative overdose, you have to give patient a toxicology management. Like you have to give antidote, or you can do extracorporeal removal of these toxins or whatever. If there's a problem with the encephalitis, you have to treat it conservatively. If there's a viral encephalitis, you can give antivirals, especially in case of HSV. Treat myasthenia gravis with immunosuppressors or plasmapheresis. Again, GBS with those things. Like they each thing have a separate kind of thing, right? And TFT, again, always don't remember hypothyroidism is a, it can cause both. It can involve in both central hypoventilation and peripheral hypoventilation. Central hypoventilation, respiratory centers are sensitive to the action of T3. So whenever there is hypothyroidism, these respiratory neurons synchrony will not be happening properly, resulting in decreased respiratory drive. Also, due to decreased B muscles not being proper, and muscles can also contribute in this type 2 respiratory failure. So always rule out this before you always rule out the hypothyroidism, especially when the patient is having features of myxedema, other features of myxedema. Okay, always rule out that. So take home point is regarding the two parameters that we use, that is NIF and P01, and regarding the rationale of using oxygen therapy, and when to start NIV, and how effectively you have to give NIV. Right at the first hour of NIV itself, you can repeat ABG. Okay, right, like after starting NIV with appropriate settings, with this effective settings, you can do an ABG to see for response, how much the patient has been responding to it, and how to use how to correlate ABG and those things, and particular mention about A minus A ratio that we can aid in our treatment.